Yo! Welcome back to One More Meta. My name's Derek, and today we're getting right back into Ikoria with another beautiful monstrosity. And this beautiful monstrosity is none other than Nethroi, Apex of Death. And I emphasize the beautiful because that comic art for this card that you're seeing on screen is crazy. And speaking of just crazy and beautiful art, this set's got everything. It's got those Godzilla arts, it's got a bunch of the comic art, it's got, if you like the classic art, whatever you need. You don't have to worry about what packets in anything. If you just head over to TCG Player, you can pick and choose whatever art you want. TCG Player will have whatever you're looking for. If you use that affiliate link down below, then we can go ahead and support the channel. It'll help us get out more and better content. We really, really do appreciate the help. Now, getting back into Nethroi. Nethroi is 2 and Abzan, so white, green, black, for a 5/5 cat nightmare beast. And it looks like, especially based on the comic art, it might have some more types mixed into that. I think they just picked the first 3 they thought of. There's a lot going on there. But there's even more going on down in that text box. Because it's got a lot. It's got Mutate to start, and that is 4, a hybrid Selesnya, and 2 black. And it also has Death Touch and Lifelink. Oh, and by the way, when you mutate it, and not just the cast, anytime it gets mutated, you can return creatures from your graveyard, any number, with a total power of 10 or less. This effect just seems insane, and there's a lot to kind of just digest here. First of all, it's when it mutates. So that means if we mutate other creatures onto it, we can keep getting this effect, which just seems silly. And it's something we're going to have to take advantage of because that mutate cost is high. We don't want to have to be just re-mutating this from the command zone every time because it is a cast, so we do pay commander tax. That's going to add up real fast. Now, the first thing when I saw this, first thought that I had was there's going to be ways to break it. You can literally just mill yourself, cast this, get 10 power worth of combo pieces, and just win. I'm not very good with combo. I'm not good at coming up with combo win cons, so I'm not sure how to do that. I'm just assuming that's the case. The way I see this is power really doesn't have any sort of affiliation with CMC nowadays. You have some crazy high CMC creatures with low power and vice versa. It's really about the impact that card has. So we can get super low CMC creatures with really high impact and take full advantage of that. And my favorite way to do that is, surprise, surprise, actually going to be with tokens. Because there's tons of awesome cards that we can go ahead, have ETB, and bring a whole little army of tokens with it. It's the best way for me, the way I see it, to cheat the system. That way we can get 1, 2 power creatures that bring a whole bunch of little buddies with them. And we can end up with a whole lot more than 10 power on board and have explosive turns with this commander. We have to jump right into the creatures for this because I'm too excited about all these low power, huge impact token creators we can get in this deck. The first one that came to my mind and really what made me think about building it this way was Hornet Queen. Hornet Queen is a 7 CMC card that's a 2/2, but brings 4 Death Touch flyers with it, meaning it only counts towards 2 of that 10 power, meaning this is just a little portion of what we're going to bring back, and that's 5 bodies on the battlefield and flying in Death Touch too. Kind of along a similar line, we have Deep Forest Hermit, only 1 power and brings 4 bodies with it. Just kind of to review, so far we have a total of 3 power that we're getting back with this 10, and we have 10 bodies on board. I think now you might be kind of seeing why it seems ridiculous. And then just to throw a little gravy on top, let's get something like a Zoni Thousand Eyed, which we're milling ourselves a lot. We're going to get easy, get 10, 15, maybe 20 tokens when a Zoni ETBs, and it's only 2 power as well. Again, total so far, we've gotten 5 power. And with that 5 power, we're going to have 15, 20, 30 tokens ETBing off of our commander's cast. It seems ridiculous. And not to mention that we can do this over and over, get some value. You'll see what we're getting into in a little bit. But just based off the token generation alone, the deck seems insane. Now, our creatures are going to fill a lot of the slots we want in this deck because although the dream turn is to just make tons of tokens and get all the value at once, again, I mentioned we want to get some incremental value throughout the game, so we want to have other roles that our creatures play, and sometimes be able to bring them back with our commander. So a lot of our self-mill is in creatures. No surprise here. Whenever I build any sort of graveyard deck, I want the whole dredge package. I want Golgari Thug, Golgari Grave Troll, Stinkweed Imp. At this point, I've talked about these cards a ton. Dredge is phenomenal in this deck, especially because we're not worried about drawing cards. We just want more in our graveyard. We really just want, which is weird I love card draw, but in this deck we want tons of ramp and tons of graveyard filling. Because our commander is almost a better version of card draw because we just get a bunch of our pieces down at once. It also means we want a lot of our creatures to be our ramp. And this is a situation where we might have an early game spot where we can't win the game, we can't really make that big leap, but we want to put ourselves ahead. Why not grab a Wood Elves, a Farhaven Elf, a Sakura Tribe Elder, a Dawn Trader Elk? All of these have tremendously low power, meaning it's taking up almost no slots really from what we're getting with our commander, and they get lands into play for us. So just a random, quick, conservative play, not even going for a win. We can go ahead and grab a Steve. We can go ahead and grab Wood Elves and Farhaven Elf. Why not get a Hornet Queen? And then while we're at it, we'll throw in that Deep Forest Hermit. That is so far a total of like 6 power. And for that, we're going to get 3 lands, 10 creatures, and still have 4 power left to mess with. This effect seems insane. And that's the importance of this ramp. Is ramping with these creatures, if you ever have a few power left, so let's say you're doing your whole thing with your commander, you get to 6 power. When in doubt, always go with those ramp creatures, because at the very least it will help you be able to mutate again with commander tax. And that's actually going to be one of the situations where the tax doesn't hurt us as much, because if we're getting a Wood Elves, Farhaven Elf every time, it's basically just paying for itself. And the last category of creatures I really want to emphasize are going to be other mutate creatures. Now, this is going to take some playtesting to figure out the happy medium, kind of the number you want, because I don't want to go mutate heavy in the deck, but I just want some that are going to fill important roles and also be able to get us that value with our commander. The first mutate one is Boneyard Lurker. It's just extra value. We can mutate, get a whole bunch of stuff straight to the battlefield, and get something back to our hand. So one of those other reasons why I'm saying that that graveyard really is a second hand in this deck. Dirgebat is a little bit expensive for the CMC to mutate, but it is a great effect, meaning we can go ahead, kill something, and get that huge effect. And that's what I love about these. Best case, we're mutating onto our commander to get our graveyard army back. But worst case, these are still serviceable effects, and it's expensive, but being able to kill something is pretty good. And Gem Razor is kind of the same deal, where we're getting to destroy an artifact or an enchantment, and if we mutate, great, we have a tremendous amount of value coming back from our graveyard, but if not, it's still single target removal, and basically takes the spot of like a Rex Sage in this deck, because we get extra benefit. I mean, Rex Sage is good enough on its own, but having basically a second version of it that can recur our graveyard is phenomenal. Now getting into the artifacts, there's not a ton, but the ones that are here are hugely important. Skull Clamp is zero surprise. I said we're not super worried about card draw in this deck because our graveyard, it doesn't matter. Skull Clamp goes in any token deck. No matter how much you want to draw cards, it needs to be there. And it is phenomenal. It works great with our dredge engines if we have it, or sometimes we might just want to draw cards. Netherborn Altar is phenomenal because we can get around that commander tax. I mentioned there's some ways to do it. This is one of the new cards that will allow us to do that so we can get recurring value. Again, we don't want it to be a one and done deal, and this makes sure that we can get around that. And the last one is Altar of Dementia. This card is one of the all-stars of the deck because it's going to serve as a weird sort of board wipe protection for us. If someone does decide to wipe the board on us, well, what we can go ahead and do is just sack our board and fill our graveyard more. It's just backup, so that way we don't lose everything. It's also great with some of the certain combinations we can get going in this deck. We can end up with some very large creatures. You can actually milk other people out in certain situations as well. It's a really versatile card. It's a sack outlet, and it is great. Moving on to the enchantments, the first one's actually similar to what I was just talking about with Altar of Dementia, and that's Death's Oasis. Whenever we have creatures die, we get to mill ourselves, which is that same sort of thing where, okay, stuff's dying. We almost get a double positive because stuff's going to the graveyard, and then we're throwing more into the graveyard, just setting up that next cast of our commander even more. It can get scary because if we get to a point where we're, mutating our commander, getting some crazy combination of creatures out, someone board wipes, and we mill ourselves, that next time is going to be even scarier because we got more there and we have access to more. Not to mention we're grabbing stuff back from our graveyard to our hand if we want to. Yeah, the value is insane. And again, there are going to be certain cards that maybe we want to have in our hand. Maybe we're not ready to mutate our commander. This is a great way to get some of that back. Cathars Crusade is in here, and I finally get a chance to put Cathars Crusade in a token deck because I'd never play white. I really have a strong dislike of white. It hurts me when I have to put it into a deck. This deck I'm okay with. The Golgari part of the deck makes up for it. And Cathars Crusade is just so good. All these token combinations, we're talking about putting 10 tokens out, 15 tokens out, 20 tokens out. It's game over. If you go get those out and you have that Cathars Crusade out, stuff gets silly. Certain combinations of this we're going to get into in that game-winning step, and maybe you can already see it coming. But there's ways we can immediately benefit off of this without even having to swing. Stuff just gets insane with Cathars Crusade. Another one I love is Tombstone Stairwell. I've talked about this a lot. It needs to be in more decks because if you're filling your graveyard with creatures, you're going to get the most benefit. You get a whole bunch of hasty zombies that all sack themselves at the end of the turn. We have plenty of sack outlets, plenty of die triggers. This card is just ridiculous. There's a cumulative upkeep, but most of the time, you only need an upkeep before this thing will either win you the game or put you so far ahead it doesn't matter. Now with the instance, we have some options. Depending on what you do with your creature base, you can either load in more removal here. You can load in more mill with stuff like grapple with the past. Different things like that, depending on what you choose for your creatures, what it lacks, you can make up for it in this instance slot with either mill, removal, kind of whatever you need. Me personally, I did a little bit of everything and put one of my pet cards in here with Gnaw to the Bone. Not life gain's not good in Commander, but when you can gain like 30 or 40 life out of nowhere for 3 mana, it's pretty decent. So I find anytime I have a creature-based graveyard deck, and I tend to build a decent number of those, Gnaw to the Bone is always in there, and it always catches people off guard. Now with the sorceries, zero surprise. Spider spawning, Worm Harvest. Like I said, it kind of has that same structure as a spider spawning deck with much less of a focus on that card itself, but it's still a great way if your commander does get taxed out, if you don't have access to it, if you just need to be able to get a board full of creatures to protect yourself, spider spawning does a great job of that, and so does Worm Harvest. Worm Harvest is probably even better just because we can just retrace it and keep casting it without having to exile it with the flashback. These cards are insane, and they are great ways to also stall out if we have a situation, especially spider spawning because of the reach. If we have a situation where we need to survive for an extra couple turns, 20 spiders on the board is a very good way to go ahead, get some chump blockers, and live a little bit longer. But yeah, other than that, we got some board wipes and stuff in here. Board wipes are going to be up to you. I love Decree of Pain because it is that card draw, and we're going to have so many creatures. Why not just draw a whole bunch of cards, move to discard, put most of them in the graveyard, and keep what we want in our hand? It is great. Decree of Pain is good in all decks, but I really like it in graveyard decks because of that. Speaking of graveyard decks and board wipes, Living Death. Again, this is a card that would normally be on the game-winning step, but there are so many explosive ways to win the game in this deck. I'm going to just throw it in with the sorceries, and we just get to throw our whole graveyard onto the battlefield with all our creatures and whole Night of the Living Dead type stuff going on there. Now with the lands, the mana base isn't super important in this deck. Again, 3 colors. Don't worry about fetches. If you have shocks, play them. But 3-color mana bases are very easy to put together. This is not a quick, explosive, kill someone in 3 turns type deck. Tap lands aren't going to hurt you. While a lot of the budget for this deck is tied up in the mana base the way I have it built, super not important. You can throw in tap lands, throw in tons of basics, all that type of stuff. Really the most important lands in this deck aren't super expensive. Dackmore Salvage is a great card, not expensive, gives us dredge, lets us fill our graveyard and hit land drops, which is awesome. I also love Grim Backwoods. It's kind of expensive cost-wise for what we're doing, 4 mana to sack a creature and draw a card, but having a sack outlet and a little bit of an extra card draw engine is great in emergencies. And my favorite land in the deck is Sphogthos the Restless Tomb. It's a ridiculous card where you pay 5 mana to make this thing into a creature whose power and toughness is equal to the number of creatures in your graveyard. Yeah, that's going to be big. Just based off of playing decks like this in the past, even when your graveyard gets exiled in decks I've played like this, having 5, 10 to 15 creatures is nothing. You're always going to have a decent amount because there's such a high density of creatures. Yeah, and this is awesome. This is a great card to take advantage of it, and it's just in a land slot. And those are the most important budget options. Now, obviously, depending on what cards you already have access to, throw in whatever. Obviously, if you have a Gaia's Cradle, it's a token deck. Put it in there. If you have an Urborg, throw it in there. If you have a Westvale Abbey, anything like that, whatever you have laying around, definitely put in there. But whereas some other decks, even last week's deck where I said Cabal Coffers was super important, really you can play this deck with a super budget mana base. Alright, and that's going to do it for all the categories. Now we have to get into the game-winning step. And this game-winning step is crazy. I'm not even going to be able to get through all the ways we can win the game with this deck. I'm just going to get through a couple of my favorites and just sit there and look at the deck list. It's almost like playing like a little puzzle where you just start putting stuff together. And, oh, I can kill someone this way. Oh, this works too. Oh, yeah, it gets ridiculous. So the first way, this is kind of the easy way, the cheaty way. I'm going to take a card from the new set, an Eerie Ultimatum. Forget total power, forget restrictions. You just take every permanent and dump it onto the battlefield. Now you can go a number of different ways with this. If you go ahead, do this, you're going to essentially end up with endless tokens. You can have your Blood Artist. You can have your Zulaport Cutthroat that comes out with this. Tons of tokens. And as long as you have any creature sack outlet that comes out, you can probably just kill everybody on board there. If you want to go combat, you can bring everything out, whether it's your Craterhoof with all your tokens, Cather's Crusade. The key to that, though, if you're going to go the combat route, you need to have a Concordant Crossroads in there. Because you have to have everything have haste. Because when you do this explosive turn, you don't want to have a million power worth of stuff and then you just have to wait. You need some sort of haste enabler like that. So if you want to go that route, Concordant Crossroads is a little bit more of an expensive card. But if you want to go that route, great. Just make sure it's in there because that is a permanent and it will come back. And I just realized as I'm doing this, not non-land, just permanent. So yeah, lands, if they got different names, just throw them on there too. This card is dumb. Now for the second way to win the game, we're going to try to use our commander to get a just giant board of massive creatures. This is going to require some enablers and some setup. We can't just win the game on the spot, and that's sort of by design. I wanted to have a limited number of ways to just bring things back from the graveyard and immediately win. But in this case, what we're going to do is grab our token generators. So all the ones I talked about before, Hornet Queen, got Deep Forest Hermit, Zoni, that type of stuff. And it just so happens we have enough space to fit a Crater Hoof into the 10 powder, make it just a crazy massive creature. And whether we have a Concordant Crossroads for haste on board, or if we have an Altar of Dimension to mill people, you're just going to win the game on the spot if you have either of those enablers. Crater Hoof is super expensive, so we don't have to worry about a Crater Hoof, though. We have so many different ways to get that value. If we have a Cathar's Crusade as an enabler, you don't need Crater Hoof out. You can just go get more and more token generators and have an even more insane number of tokens and even more insane board presence. One of my favorite things to do is just go grab a Golgari Grave Troll. 0 power, and it enters the battlefield with +1 counters, meaning when it's targeted in the graveyard, that's 0 power. So why not just get a massive Golgari Grave Troll, throw it onto the battlefield with all our tokens, and get something like an overwhelming Stampede ready the next turn. So we just have an insane, massive board of tramplers. There are so many fun things you can do in different combinations with the creatures in this deck. There's plenty of creatures in here that get big based off of creatures in the graveyard, different things like that. It's like a little puzzle you get to solve every game, and usually the end result is a massive board and players dead. And this last way to win the game is much more on the spot. This game has gone on for too long. Let's try to just drain everybody out in one go. So we're going to want a sack outlet. My go-to in the deck is Viscera Seer. We can also have cards that care about things dying, like a Blood Artist and a Zulaport Cutthroat. That's a whole total of like 3 power right there. Sorry, 2 power. Blood Artist is 0 power, so that's 2 power so far. Wonderful. We still have 8 power to work with, and the rest are just going to be massive token producers. We got Izoni. We got Deep Forest Hermit. We got the Hornet. It's the same crew. We're going to get them all back. Really, whatever ones we have, fit in all we can in that 10 power. And then we can go ahead and sack all those tokens, sack the creatures, and just start draining people. Now, it's not always guaranteed to just kill everybody on the spot, but you got a real good chance with all those tokens we're making. And that's going to do it for this week's deck tech. I really hope y'all enjoyed it. I know I try to make every deck into a token deck, but I really think this is a cool take on this commander. Just because once I started doing the math on how many low power creatures matter so much in token decks, it broke my mind. It's ridiculous what we can do in a single turn. And like I said, there are ways to get that value repeatedly. It's a really resilient deck, and even with Graveyard Exiling, as long as you pack enough creatures in there, it can keep going and going and going. How do y'all feel about Nethroi? Are you a fan of this weird demon cat creepy thingy, or do you have a different commander that you're super excited to build? As always, huge shout out to all the patrons we love and appreciate y'all so much. This Ikoria set has gotten me brewing more than I have in a while. I'm very excited about a lot of these legends. It was actually hard to set up finish one deck because there were so many other tabs I had open of other decks I was throwing things together for, which is always a good sign. But there's plenty more to come. Until then, I will see y'all next time.